Star Trek books. They've been around for decades. Join us, the Trek ladies, Kavura and Jen, as we discuss the novels one at a time. Welcome to the Ladies Trek Library. Hello, so today on Ladies Trek Library, we will be discussing The Entropy Effect by Vonda McIntyre. And so I'm going to start by reading the back cover of the book. The universe has less than a century left, unless Spock can change history. The Enterprise is summoned to transport a dangerous criminal from Starbase Prison to a rehabilitation center. Brilliant physicist Dr. Jojo Mordreau, accused of promising to send people back in time, then killing them instead. But when Mordreau escapes, bursts onto the bridge and kills Captain Kirk, Spock must journey back to time to avert disaster before it occurs. Now there's more at stake than just Kirk's life. Mordreau's experiments have thrown the universe into a deadly time warp. Spock is fighting time, and the universe is closing in on itself with the relentless squeeze of the entropy effect. Well, so the summary kind of gives away a little, doesn't it? About Kirk. Kirk does die in this.
Yeah, I actually hadn't read the summary until you just read it. I don't ever read the summaries because I don't want to get any spoilers when I'm reading. It's interesting, but I guess the fact that Kirk dies is kind of a major plot point, so...
Kind of happens about halfway through the book, or maybe a little sooner. Okay, but what did you think about the characterizations in this book of the established characters?
I really liked how the established characters were portrayed. When I first started to read this book, I had heard good things about it, but some of the earlier pocketbooks, and this was only the second one behind the motion picture novelization. Some of them were pretty hit or miss, with what I would describe as poor characterizations, and it didn't really feel like Star Trek. But this one was very good. I felt like the characters were all really felt like, how they were portrayed on the original series, and the story felt a lot to me like it could have been an episode of the original series.
I felt so too. I like, since Spock is my favorite character, and he was sort of the main character of this story, which I like. But I also think that Spock's character was handled very well as far as the way he acted, and the way he dealt with the Dr. Mordreau, because that was it was an old teacher of his, and Spock thought it was great to see him again, but then didn't like that he was accused of murder and wanted him to, if he was he didn't want him to be in the brig. He said, well, at least put him in a cabin, and you can have him, you can have security watch him, but I don't think he really would have committed murder. And because Spock knew this person, so it was great that he could do that he asked for that, and that Kirk allowed it.
Yeah, I agree. It was a good portrayal of Spock, and the other major character besides Captain Kirk, at least the major not original character, was Sulu. And although we did get a lot more backstory to him than what we saw in the series, I felt like the author kept pretty true to his character, and it felt believable to me, the plot line with him and the romance that he has with an original character on there.
Yeah, Sulu's character was great too. I like that they explored his character more, even though we didn't get to see as much of Uhura and Chekhov, but that's okay. It's a relatively short book. And also there were new characters in this book, which I thought, they were also great characters. The security people, it was mostly like because Sulu was having a romance with Mandela Flynn, who was the head of security on the Enterprise. And Mandela Flynn was a great character, I thought, as Sulu's love interest.
Yeah, I really liked her as a character. I thought she was a believable love interest for Sulu, and she was just an interesting character, someone who I think they described her as she was a stateless person. She had kind of grown up on different worlds, and she didn't really have a home of her own, or a place that she thought of as a home. But she had some similar interests to Sulu. She taught Sulu judo, and he was teaching her fencing. And sometimes in the stories when they write an original character who's a love interest, it just feels forced. But this seemed pretty believable to me. I'd say the only thing that maybe kind of made me laugh, but I guess it was in keeping with the time that the book was written, was the Sulu with the long hair and the mustache, which you can see on the original cover. I think some of the subsequent covers just have Spock on them, but to me that was
Funny.
I didn't know that I really could believe it, but I was like, well, it was published in early 1981, so it kind of fit with the timeline there.
And does it, they put that on the cover because it was explained in the book, and that was funny. An agreement that Sulu made with Mandela Flynn about if she doesn't cut her hair, he'll let his hair grow long. That was pretty neat. And then the rest of the security team, you had a woman who was this genetically engineered muscular woman, and another person that was like a cat creature. I mean, all of these were great, and I thought it's really what a security team should be. It's what you would think, like, why aren't they all like this? I mean, people that you would really be afraid of if you saw them.
Yeah, all of the original characters who were part of the security team were interesting. The woman you're talking about, her name was Jennifer Aristides. She was interesting. Yes, you said genetically engineered. She came from a high gravity planet, so she was like very muscular. But interestingly enough, in the book, although she was part of security, she was the one character who didn't want to be a part of security. And at the end ends up getting transferred to the botany department. But yeah, these were all pretty interesting original characters.
Yeah, that was interesting. And I like how she was developed too, because she was made fun of and bullied for her looks because she was a woman, but she was considered a less attractive woman. And she was very sensitive to that. And I just thought that was a great characterization there.
Yeah, I liked her and the other security team original characters. As you mentioned, there was like a cat, felinoid person, and some other more minor ones. And then I don't know if we want to get into some of the other original characters who were not part of the security team, but were part of another ship's crew, and then some people from the planet LF Prime.
There were several characters that were well developed in the book. And then we also have the one we would call the villain, Dr. Mordro, Spock's old mentor. And he was an interesting character too, because this book, involves time travel. And so we have this man who really, he had different personalities and different timelines, just because of, not because of being raised differently, because the timelines didn't split until he was older. But the fact that there was the one that was like a villain that didn't care about what he did to the timeline, and the one that was nice and wanted to save his friends.
Yeah, he was an interesting character. And as you said, multiple characters. There was him from the current timeline, I guess you could call it, who was the prisoner on the Enterprise. And then there was the Mordro from the past. And then the one from the future I guess there were two ones from the future. There was you could say the good one from the future, who was trying to come back in time and prevent his younger self from doing this, conducting these temporal experiments. And then there was the crazy Mordro from the future. And that one reminded me of, and I should have looked it up. I'm so terrible with episode names, but there was an original series episode with, where they go to the prison, the penal planet, and there's the guy who has been conducting these experiments, and he goes crazy, and it reminded me a bit of him.
Oh, Dagger of the Mind, that one. Yeah. With where they sit in the chair and the neural paralysis that does something to their brain. Yeah. Yes, exactly. It does remind you of that.
But yeah, he was an interesting character, and then there was the character of I'd say to me it felt like the real villain was actually Ian Brathwaite, who was the prosecuting attorney from LF Prime. because he was the one who was trying to foil everything that Spock and McCoy and the future Doctor were trying to do to correct the timeline.
Yes, I wanted to mention him too because he was, it's like he's the one that was really there to get in everybody's way, and the one that seems like he was there just to throw suspicion and to cause I want to say injustice. But I mean, yeah, he's the one that got Scotty to he made Scotty suspicious of the other characters. That was one of the things that I was kind of like, I'm not sure about that, but yes, Ian was there to be a real antagonist.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that I completely bought the idea that this guy Ian Brathwaite would be able to convince Scotty that Dr. McCoy and Spock were up to no good and were trying to sabotage the Enterprise. I would hope that Scotty would, trust McCoy and Spock over this guy that he's just met. So that little plot line was a little hard to believe.
Yeah, that one was. But Mordro and the way he was with his friends, when we finally get to see him when he wants to send his friends back in time, and then we find out how adamant his friends were that they really wanted to go back in time. And the fact that Mordro was, to him, the good Mordro was really just trying to help his friends.
Yeah, he definitely didn't realize the consequences of his actions. I did wonder, though, they never really explained in the book why his friends were so adamant about going back and living in the past. And the one guy, Param, I think was his name, one of the Mordro's friends, when the Mordro from the future convinces his past self to not continue with his experiments and not send his friends back in time, Param gets very angry and acts like, Mordro has ruined his whole life. So kind of wondered why would somebody want to go back in time that much that, so they never really explained that, but although that was not really like a major.
I kind of got the impression that they just felt like they could have better lives in the past, even though it wasn't explained, but for some reason, I don't know, they might have been like against technology for one thing and just wanted to live in simpler times. But it wasn't gone into.
Yeah, that could be, and that would be interesting because if you're against technology, but you're okay with using a time travel mechanism to.
How ironic.
But I did want to say, going back to Ian Brathwaite, just a thought occurred to me as I was reading this. The whole plot line with him trying to foil Spock and McCoy's attempts to fix things was sort of based on the premise that he didn't have all of the information and he didn't know what they were trying to do, so he assumed the worst and assumed they were the villains. And it really reminded me of, I don't know if you ever watched this show in the 70s, Three's Company.
Yes.
But, every episode of Three's Company was like one person overhears something or they make they make an assumption that's not true, and based on them believing something incorrect, then they go about, something else. And if they only knew, the full story, we wouldn't have the episode. And it felt to me very much like a Three's Company episode in a way, set in Star Trek with this guy, thinking he's got all the information and he really doesn't. And he's really trying to ruin everyone else's trying to do the right thing.
Yes, I do, because Three's Company was kind of like based on misunderstandings, right? And that's kind of what this was. This one guy who didn't really know everything that was going on. But you can't blame him because like they said in the books, all of the records for Dr. Mordro, they had all been destroyed. It was all kept a secret as to what really happened.
Yeah, true. Although it makes you wonder, of course, if Spock and McCoy had filled him in on what was happening, then, a lot of their problems wouldn't have happened. But at the same time, they felt like they couldn't talk about what was happening because it was involved, tampering with, altering the timeline. So.
Right. And so, what were some things you liked about the book?
Oh, there was one other character I'd like to talk about too, which was Hunter.
Hunter, yes.
Captain Hunter. And she was the captain of the Airfin. I'm going to say that. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. who was kind of like a former love interest of Kirk. So of course that had a very, original series feel with Kirk encountering someone who was his former lover, but now a captain. And she was an interesting character as well. And Sulu ended up in one of the timelines transferring over to her ship. Um, I don't know though other than the fact that she sort of served as in a capacity for Sulu's, in this whole one timeline where he wanted to move forward in his career, and transfer to her ship. I don't know that her character really served a whole lot of purpose. And it also was a very 70s sort of feel with, her being a former love interest of Kirk, but also being a part of this, I don't know what you call it, in a society where there's like a group marriage.
Yes.
Invited Kirk to join her group marriage several times and he had declined.
I think they called it a partnership in this book, which and you get the impression it's a polyamorous relationship where you have it's a marriage with several men and several women. And that is something, in our culture, we just kind of look at that and go, what? Well, that just isn't, we want to say that isn't right, but it's just something because, maybe it's just that our culture doesn't accept that. But and I thought it was strange that the first part, like it says that in the past she had invited Kirk to join and Kirk said no, which we could understand. And then in this book is saying in the present in this book, Kirk actually thinks that he regretted that. He's looking back and going, maybe I should have accepted that because I'm lonely now. And I was like, no, I don't think Kirk would have really been that way. I don't think he would have really changed his mind in that particular case about wanting to go back and join the partnership.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like, Kirk's first love was always the Enterprise. And, as we know, he never, at least, during the run of the series and some of the movies, he didn't settle down. So I can't really imagine him having regrets about, not being in this partnership. But, again, maybe that was a very 70s thing to, exploring different sort of relationships that are different than what most viewers or readers think about as normal. So in a way it was kind of alien and different.
So maybe that's what they were getting at. But also the character Hunter, I think she became more important at the end when she came to the Enterprise and said, like, what's going on? And she was asking McCoy, where is Spock? And McCoy tried to lie to her and when he finally told her the truth and she said, okay, Spock had said he'd be back in 12 hours, so I'll give you 12 hours. I mean, she was kind of the person to cause conflict right at the end. Someone more powerful than just, Braithwaite, because they could just ignore him, basically.
Yeah, that's true. That is a good point.
And also the characters, so as you talked about Hunter and Mandela Flynn, I found out they were actually used again in other books. So some by Vonda McIntyre and some of the other authors also carried them on. So it's great that they were able to reuse, each other's characters. And also some of the past in this book, about Sulu's past growing up on another, planet. It was the name of it was something strange like Gangelo or something, but that has also been mentioned in another novel later on. So anyway, I love that connection, how they keep the continuity with the books.
Yeah, I had not read any other books where those characters were in it, but that is always neat when you see some of the same characters getting reused, especially when they're interesting characters.
And there was one line in this book that I liked. Spock is no more fun drunk than sober. I don't know why that one stuck to me, but it was funny. And did you also notice the mention of Lewis Carroll in this book?
Yes, I did. Yeah, because that was mentioned on the original series, of course, and now Discovery has used it several times. So interesting that it has also made its way into the novels.
But in this book, it said that Spock was it McCoy or Kirk that was thinking like, well, Spock would never understand the Lewis Carroll reference, but we know that isn't true. Now they've established on Discovery that his mother read him Lewis Carroll.
I think they mentioned that in the original series as well. I think that's where Discovery picked up on it, that there was a time in the original series where it was mentioned.
It was mentioned on the animated series.
It was mentioned on the animated series. As far as I know, that's where it was mentioned first. So, yeah, even though that isn't considered canon, a lot of the animated series has been sort of retro canoned into Star Trek. So do we have, any problems with the book? I know we've discussed a few things.
No, I mean, overall, I really liked it. I thought it was a great, early novel. Like I said, it really felt to me like, like it could have been an episode of the original series, and it was like the right length of time to be that too. Interesting characters, the plot line itself about traveling back in time multiple times to try to fix the timeline. I mean, we've seen that in other novels and on shows, but I thought it was really well done. So I would definitely recommend this book.
Yes, as far as time travel, I thought that
Yes, as far as time travel, I thought that time travel can be muddy. It can be confusing when you're reading a book, but I think this book does keep it clean. It does keep it where you can follow it pretty well, and understand everything that's in it, and know who was from what time period, and not be confused. So that was well thought out. And also, yeah. And I like the fact that the book is science fiction, because it's got the time travel, and that the idea of that spider web gun, I thought that was good too. That was something new and different.
Yeah, I thought it was a sort of unique time travel story, different than some of the other time travel ones, and also really just fascinating about how this same person can exist in different timelines and change his mind, and not realize at the time that he's doing something that's dangerous and that can be used as a weapon, and then to have his future self come back and convince him not to use it. Makes you think about a lot of scientific discoveries that the research wasn't being done for anything malicious, but of course it turns out that people can use it that way. And would some of these, if these people could have traveled in time, would some of their future selves have gone back and said, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that?
And also I have to say, again, we were talking about the characters, but this one had, some people might find it very noticeable. It was a female writer, and they had a lot of strong female characters in it. And I like that. I've read some criticisms about that, but I think it was, I think everything fit well. It was all good, and showing that the female characters can fit into Starfleet, and they can still be themselves. And so a lot of the characterizations worked. And I will have to say again about Kirk dying. We know that, like, this is Star Trek, and you can't really have a main character die. So when you're reading that in the book, you know that somehow they're going to find a way to bring him back.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's not really a spoiler, since we know, that all of these novels written within the original series or, movie timeline, that the characters are going to have to end up back where they were to begin with after the writer's done with them. So it can't have, Kirk dying and not coming back only on book 2 when we've got hundreds of other novels and movies following that. So, but I'm really surprised, because I hadn't read that criticism about the female characters, and I thought they both of the original female characters in here, Captain Hunter and Security Chief Mandala Flynn, they were really strong characters. I thought they were well written. And then of course there was the security officer, Aristides. All of them I thought were very well done. So I really can't imagine anyone criticizing this, but people will find something to criticize.
And I don't think it was just for the purpose of having female characters either. I think and I don't think it was just
right. What's wrong with having female characters as long as they're well done? And I don't think it was just for the purpose of having female characters either. I think they worked in the story. It's not like they were thrown in just for a certain effect. They were actually thrown in because they were part of the story and they worked well with the story. So, I mean, this is a book that I read back when it first came out. And so now just having reread it, I think it still works. I mean, it's still a good story after all these many years, even though it has, like you mentioned, like something that felt more 70s, but it's still, I think that the science part still works as far as, like I said, the time travel and the spiderweb gun. I do think it kind of, it took a while to get to the time travel part. I mean, that's what I noticed reading it more recently. It wasn't until like about halfway through that they really got to the time travel. Before that, it was more about developing the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it did feel maybe a little slow. And as you mentioned before, Kirk didn't die until halfway into the story almost, and that was, the main plot point, which sets McCoy and Spock off to try to go back in time and prevent that from happening. So there was a lot of character development, which made the plot a little slower, even though it's a pretty short novel anyway. But I thought it was a good pace. The characters were interesting, and it contributed to the story. So I don't know that I would have, changed anything if I were the author. I think the way it was done was good.
And also so it started out with Spock, saying that he was studying a singularity. Now, the idea about the singularities, I like that too, because, I mean, showing that they were caused by sort of a rip in the time-space continuum, and that's the idea of, the title of the book, the entropy effect, like, the universe is headed towards entropy, which means headed toward chaos, and it's all because of this traveling back through time, which, like they're saying, well, that never should have happened. Like you shouldn't really travel in time because that's going to cause all these problems with space, and it's going to cause space to collapse in a much shorter time than it would have otherwise.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting concept about how that was handled with the time travel. That it started out with Spock studying the singularity, and them not knowing what causes the singularity. And then eventually Spock coming to the conclusion that the singularity is being caused by the time travel experiments that Dr. Mordreau is doing. And that every time he sends people back in time, it's creating this singularity, which, if it gets bigger and bigger, may destroy the universe. And so in order for things to, the universe to be balanced, the people who were sent back in time need to be returned to their rightful time. And that was an interesting concept.
It's one of the themes of the book. Which is in a lot of science fiction books, like don't try to change time. That's a no-no. Don't do that. So,
yeah, that is true. And this was a little different in it too, because, we have some later books and shows where there's time travel involved in, the whole Department of Temporal Investigation series. And those focus more on like someone who's gone back in time and changed something, and that has to be righted. And this was more about, Dr. Mordreau had tried very carefully to make sure that the people he sent back in time were not going to affect history in any way. They didn't say where they went, but he said that they were in a place where, no one would know they were from the future, and maybe they were going to be living isolated, and they wouldn't have any effect on anything. But the time travel problem in this story, was not from them going back in time and changing the course of history or anything like that, but from the fact that just by them traveling through time, they're creating this singularity, which is going to destroy the universe.
Yes,
a different, unique.
Yeah, a different take on the story. Instead of it being about changing time and something bad happening, it was just the time travel in general is what caused the problem. But also the fact that Spock kept having to go back further. He went back in time to the time on the Enterprise, and then he had to go back even further back to the time to keep the Enterprise from being called back to Aleph, where they picked up the Doctor. I mean, it's just, the fact that he kept having to go further and further back in time because he couldn't set time right on his first jump, and then he couldn't set time right on the next jump. It was kind of I mean, again, showing the entropy effect, showing how the more you keep trying, and like time is probably just going to keep messing you up. As someone said in the book, entropy always wins.
Yeah, and I wonder, and you'll probably know the title of this episode because you are much better at episode titles than I am, but it makes me wonder reading this if the writers for Discovery had read this novel or knew about it, because, there's it was sort of like a Groundhog Day episode, on Discovery where, in that case, it was Stamets had to, keep living the same day over and over again until he could set things right. And it was sort of similar in this book with Spock. It wasn't the same day over and over again, but, he had several attempts to go back in time and fix the problem, and he wasn't successful. So he had to keep going back in time over and over until he was able to set things right.
Yeah, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. One of the long titles. Yes. So,
parallels in this book.
You can find similarities to lots of different things, which is great too. So overall, I think this was a very enjoyable book. I mean, back when it first came out and even now. So it definitely works as a Star Trek book, and I think even as a science fiction book, it works very well.
Yeah, I agree. This was the first time I had read it. I have read some of the older novels, but I had not read this one yet. And as I said, some of the older novels are pretty hit or miss, but this one was definitely a really good one. The science fiction part of it was very interesting too. And, plus the characters and just, I think a really good story overall that would have worked great as an episode.
Okay, so we both agree that we liked it.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.